If the enemy's choosing a side against us, how does God redeem our and other people's choices? I'm going to bring up the question of permission and how, when we have that understanding, it can actually empower us.
Welcome to the Sifted Wheat Podcast with Leslie Lamb, a counselor by profession, a minister of truth, and a lover of people. This is a safe place where she sets a path for others to learn how to move through hard seasons with confidence and grace, encouraging your faith, empowering your choices, and challenging your perceptions through the Word, the wisdom from years of counseling others, and her own experience of being sifted. Here's Leslie.
There's something about revisiting the past that kind of makes you want to go back and dig up some of those articles, some of those things that you held on to as your promises. And I mentioned Psalm 51, and for me, that was really one of those things that held me fast, that I've been able to kind of look back and see how God truly met me in that season and how he truly delivered on the promises that he made. One of my favorite parts of Psalm 51, and one that I rehearsed often in my sifting season, was verses 10 through 13. And it says this, I'm going to read it. Do not cast me from your presence or take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation and grant me a willing spirit to sustain me. Then I will teach transgressors your ways so that sinners will turn back to you. In the first episode, I mentioned the experience of sifting, but there's actually a work in sifting. And it's the process of separating the seed from the chaff. And in my process, it was very particular to a few things. The first thing was, it was a process of uprooting and replanting faith. I had to relearn the character of God. I had to replace these false references connected to religion. I had to acknowledge my sinfulness in the light of his goodness and kindness and mercy and grace. And I can say that with a smile now, but it was not fun. It was a time where I really had to come face to face with my humanity and God's holiness. The enemy tells us that our purpose is to be destroyed through him, right? He desires to destroy us, to seek, kill, and destroy. But God wants us to learn from these things. He's teaching us that sifting doesn't have to be the end, that by his grace, it can be a beautiful beginning. This is kind of reiterated in John 12:24, and it says, unless a wheat kernel falls to the ground and dies, it produces many seeds. This is the point, as Jesus lived out, that our sifting and our dying establishes a harvest that feeds others. So what that means is that sifting usually involves crushing. It's interesting to note that 1 year before all of this happened, the Lord had said to me, you're going to leave your childhood faith behind. Listen, I had no idea what that meant. I was actually minding my own business. I was sitting in the bathroom, I know, maybe TMI, and all of a sudden, this sense of God's voice came into my head, or just this impression. How I hear from the Lord is just the sense of a voice that's outside of me that's not actually audible. There was this strong understanding that I was going to leave behind my childhood faith. And I was in my parents' house when I had that moment. So I was like, what in the world does that mean? And I didn't have any answers for it right then, but it was kind of one of those things that I held on to and I pondered it in my heart. And the reality is like in the moment of the sifting, I really didn't realize that that's part of what was happening. All I could feel was the weight of the pain and the crushing. And it's only after I got through that I was able to see, oh, wait a minute, there was some goodness that came out of this. Not that God wanted to see me hurt and not that God wanted to see me experience that pain, but that he used that which had been planned against me to give me strength. And I think that was just the point that Jesus was trying to make when he said in Luke to Peter, Satan has asked to sift you as wheat, but I have prayed for you that you would be strengthened. We see another place where maybe Satan asks for permission, and I think sometimes this is difficult. When we see in Job that the devil is seeking to prove that Job's loyalty is false. And so we have this moment where the enemy comes into the courts of God and he says, I bet I could get Job to turn on you. And it's interesting because if we're not careful, we're going to see God as villainous in his response of saying, okay, but he didn't really say that. He said, I give you permission for all that is yours, but you cannot lay a hand on Job. That's really significant because God didn't author the trial. He didn't say, hey, I want to put Job on trial. The enemy authored the trial. I want to put Job on trial because I can't stand his loyalty to you. And God, knowing who Job was and knowing the strength of Job, made a condition. And basically he said, whatever you have access to, I give you access to, but I don't give you access to Job's life, his body, his actual being. And so he had faith in Job. And Jesus also had faith in Peter because he said, I've prayed for you that you would not fail and that when you come back. So that was an understanding that Jesus was saying, I know you're going to make it through this, Peter, and it's going to be tough, but you're going to make it through. And when you do, you're going to strengthen others. So that kind of poses the question, who gives permission? If the deal is he gets access to what's his, then who gives the permission? And I guess the truth is that can be different depending, but a large part of it is we do or others do. I know in my own particular case, I allowed the enemy access to my heart because there were still some unhealed hurts that I had kind of, maybe I had gained some understanding of, but I didn't really know how they were operating in my life and how much power that they had been given until really all of this episode started to resurface. It's kind of like, if you hurt yourself and you get a piece of glass lodged in, your hand or your finger. I mean, you can continue to go through life with that piece of glass in your finger and maybe it won't even aggravate you. But we just have this amazing healing system within our body that when things are foreign objects, our body will seek to move them to the surface. And as a counselor, I see that's true all the time. Like we try to hide stuff. We try to say, hey, I'm not going to deal with that. I don't have to deal with that. That's not who I am anymore. But the reality is if we don't deal with those hurts, they're going to resurface. And they're going to resurface in ways that are going to bring pain. But this is one thing that I've learned about God in this whole process of healing is that the enemy seeks to expose us to bring shame, to bring heartache, to bring destruction. But when God allows things to be exposed, it's for the purpose of bringing us deeper healing. And so we really have to decide, am I going to allow God permission in this moment and in this sifting, or am I going to give permission to the enemy? Kind of to go back to Job, one of the things that you read in Job, and if you haven't read Job, I encourage you to read it. You see this loyal servant of God, and he is doing everything that he can to honor God with his whole entire life. And one of the things that he does is that it says that he goes and he offers sacrifices for his sons and daughters because he knows that they are partying and they are doing things that he recognizes are unrighteous behaviors. And they're not going to the altar. Job is going to the altar for them. And he's saying, hey, cover my kids because they're making some choices that aren't congruent with righteousness and the covering of God. And so actually when Satan went in to create chaos and destruction in Job's life, the first thing that he started with was what was in nature, like the possessions of Job. And the second thing that he targeted was his children. And don't get scared about that. I'm not saying that we need to be fearful over our children. I do believe in spiritual authority and us being able to declare that our children are covered. But these were adults. These weren't children. These were Job's children who were adults. And as adults, they were making choices that were destructive. And when the enemy got access to Job's life and the things that were connected to him, destruction is that thing. And so I don't know if one of you might be listening and you've experienced some heartache in your life. You've experienced some hardship in your life. And maybe it's connected to some choices that those people around you have made. And that's really hard for us. But we have to realize that we're either going to trust God to redeem the hurt and the pain, or we're going to let go completely. And the enemy is absolutely going to come in and he's going to use that sin. He's going to use that pain against us. And he wants to. But that's why another thing that I love about this interaction between Jesus and Peter is that his response to Peter was, he's asked, but I've prayed. He got involved. Listen, let's not forget that Peter and the disciples knew the authority of prayer. It was the one thing that they said, God, teach us how to do this. Because they saw that there was significance. When Jesus prayed, when Jesus talked to the Father, things changed. And so when Jesus said to Peter, I've prayed, that wasn't a cop-out. He wasn't saying, I can't help you, but I believe in you and I think you can do this. No, he was saying, Peter, I need you to trust me. I've prayed. I will see you through this. The enemy won't get the final say. He's asked, but I've prayed. And the outcome will be that when you come through this, you will strengthen your brothers. That is God producing purpose in our pain, not that God authored the pain. And the thing is that what God seeks to produce in these seasons is not just for us. It's for those around us too. I work at Mercy. I have worked there many years. And one of the things that we teach and one of the things that our founder, Nancy Alcorn, is very popular for saying is there are other people on the other side of our obedience. And Jesus was saying that. He was saying, like, this isn't just for you, Peter. You're going to be strengthened and that's going to be amazing. But also your strength is going to catapult others into deeper awareness, deeper understanding. And if we see, we know the rest of the story. So, right, Jesus had that conversation with Peter. Peter was tested. Peter chose to deny God, but God in his goodness showed up, redeemed, restored, and truly Peter became the church, the church backbone. He became the rock on which the church was built. And so what Jesus said he would do, he did. And it's important for us to recognize that we are not floating on this island of self-sufficiency and woe is me, and that God is separate from us and we're just supposed to figure this thing out. But that there are promises that are connected to our coming through this season. And that brings back the words, in Psalm 51. And to be honest, when I was reading that, I was focusing more on what I needed God to do in me, the cleansing, the renewing, the refreshing of my spirit. And I paid very little attention to those last words that say, I will teach transgressors your ways so that sinners will turn back to you. I couldn't see that in the moment because all I could see and feel was the weight of my sin. But as I've come through and as I have looked back, I can see that what I've learned and what I learned in that season, I am still continuing to be able to use and communicate to those around me to see there's hope. It feels very real. It feels very dark. It feels frightening even. But there is another page to this story. I tell people all the time that, we don't see the next chapter. We just have to believe for it. And so I can be reading the present chapter and I can feel like this is the whole story. But I just want to encourage you, it's not the whole story. Don't let it be the whole story. Turn the page. I say that a lot of times in counseling. Turn the page. The enemy wants to convince you that this story is the rest of your life, but turn the page. If you were reading a book and you read a really bad chapter, I don't know about you, but I'm a huge reader and I read books all the time. And there are some books that I read a chapter and I'm like, ugh, that's disgusting. Or I hate that. Or that's so sad. Or she just lost everything in her life. What would happen if I just shut the book? And then I just told people, man, that is a sucky book. You should not read that because chapter 39 is horrible. Well, they would look at me and they said, well, what about chapter 40? Oh, I don't know. I quit reading after chapter 39 because it was just so devastating. They would look at me like, well, how can you judge a book based on one chapter? And they would be right. But we do that so often. We will judge our lives based on one chapter. And I'm encouraging you, don't do that. There's more to the book. There's more to the story. It feels dark. It feels deep. It feels very uncomfortable. But there's more to the story. And yes, it takes courage to believe, to flip that page. It takes courage to trust that God can author a different ending than the one that you fear. But I promise you, if you'll make the choice, if you'll trust, if you'll believe, it's like the last question that I asked in the last episode was, who are you putting your hope in? Because who we put our hope in largely determines how things are going to play out. I put my hope in the Lord, and it wasn't easy. And it's not easy. And I want to be sure that you hear that. Like, I'm not saying this because it's easy. I'm saying this because it's true. I put my hope in the Lord, and my hope in the Lord is what got me through to the other side. And now I'm writing a completely different chapter of my story. I'm writing a completely different chapter of my book where the enemy is no longer calling the shots. He no longer gets to use the shame of my past as a weapon against me. He no longer gets to identify me with my failures or my feelings. There's a deeper understanding of who I am. There's a deeper understanding of whose I am. And recognizing that the sifting wasn't for nothing. I actually like who I am today. And I couldn't have told you that 13 years ago. Like sometimes I read my journals from back then and I'm like, dang, who is this girl? Like I don't even recognize her anymore. She's so hopeless. She's so afraid. She's so unloving towards herself. But it really was who I am. I have to look back and then say, Leslie, yes, that was your journal. And the beauty of healing is I don't look back and condemn her and think, what was wrong with you, girl? I think, oh man, if you only knew where you were going to be in 13 years. If you only believed that the hope that you were planting, and it was teeny tiny small at that time, was actually going to grow into this oak of righteousness that was going to bear fruit. Sometimes I think about her and I want to say, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you because you didn't give up. I'm proud of you because you didn't determine that that chapter was going to be the rest of your life. And did she make bad mistakes after that? Yeah, I did. I made some more mistakes because until I really worked out what was working in me that the enemy was using, I did. I went around that mountain a few times. But every time I went around that mountain, I put my eyes on truth. And I put my eyes on the hope of God. This is difficult. This is hard. I don't understand it. But I trust the words that you spoke to Peter are also the words that you speak to me, that I will be strengthened. And so my focus shifted. I stopped looking at everything that was happening and all that I was feeling, but I started to think, God, how can you use this to bring glory to your name? And when I look back and I see how he did it, it never ceases to amaze me. And now I have this beautiful opportunity to sit with women and men and learn their stories and listen in such a way that allows me to help them to refocus and reframe and represent the truth in their stories so that they can see who they truly are and what God has for them and how he's going to make what the enemy intended for harm good. And that's why I'm here. I just want to keep being that voice to encourage you because he can produce something in this. And he does say over all of us, you don't have to see this as a failure. And also, what's wrong with failure? A lot of people who are major successes failed first. I am that person. I failed, and I failed miserably. But guess what? I'm not a failure. I'm not a failure because I got up from that place and I looked to my Savior and I allowed him to show me how to walk out of that space. So I want to ask you, who are you blaming for your struggle? Are you blaming yourself? I got myself into this. I got to get myself out. Are you blaming other people? And maybe there is some fault there, but regardless of whose fault it is your responsibility if you want to heal. And if all you do is blame, you're nowhere closer to healing. So don't spend your energy thinking about how other people have hurt you. Spend your energy seeking how God is going to use this to bring beauty and how God is going to use this to break off the false beliefs of religion or childhood trauma or even our own family experience. In our next episode, I want to talk about how who you blame truly does determine the outcome of your story. I'm so glad that you guys are joining me, and I'm so glad that God has given me this opportunity to share with you this journey. And I'm looking forward to the day where your pain and your struggle is in your rearview mirror. Right now, it might feel like it's the windshield and it's all that you see, but I promise you, if you lean in, I promise you, if you choose to see things slightly different, if you put your hope in God and trust that he sees you, this can all end very differently. Turn the page. There's another chapter to be written.